Thank you for joining us. My name is Kevin Beckenstead. I serve on the Board of Directors for the Minnesota Technology Association. And in my day job, I'm the Vice President of Commercial Operations Technology at Thrivent. So I'm excited to introduce this session. So we'll be talking about tech apprenticeships. I know other states are using this and other communities are using this as an approach to create a tech talent pipeline. So we are so lucky to have two fantastic speakers today. First, we've got Katie McClelland, the Director of the Public Policy and Research at Mintech. Prior to that, she worked on the workforce policy portfolio for the U.S. House Committee on Education and Labor and the Health, Education, Labor, and Pension Committee. Before her time on Capitol Hill, she held roles at the Manufacturing Institute, the Lumina Foundation, and also with Minneapolis Public Schools and Achieve Minneapolis. Katie has done research on the future of work, employer engagement in the workforce development initiatives, and she's also worked on strategies for attracting the next generation of students into STEM careers. We also have Jennifer Carlson, the co-founder and executive director of Apprenti. So Jennifer serves as the executive director of the Washington Technology Industry Association Workforce Institute. And this is the arm of the organization that focuses on addressing tech industry workforce and diversity, and what's needed to build a nationally recognized or registered technology apprenticeship program. Jennifer also serves on the Tech Councils of North American Workforce Board and as an adjunct professor in graduate studies at Seattle University. Previously, she also held leadership roles, developing core capabilities and branding initiatives for a large division of AIG, and she also managed the U.S. sports and event marketing for Progressive Insurance. So both Katie and Jennifer bring a wealth of knowledge on this topic, and I'm really looking forward to hearing their perspectives. Just a quick reminder before we get going, just like the other sessions, put your questions in the chat and we'll get to those as much as we can. With that, I will pass it to Katie to get started.
Great, thanks so much, Kevin. And just give me one moment while I share my screen here. All right. Well, thank you again for having me. I am very excited to talk about tech apprenticeships today. One other thing, in my previous roles in Capitol Hill, I also led the reauthorization of the National Apprenticeship Act, which is kind of the legislation that kind of governs the whole apprenticeship system. So still waiting for the Senate to take that up, but I am incredibly passionate about apprenticeship and really excited to talk about it today with all of you. So I think the first thing to really kind of level set here is like, what is apprenticeship? People talk about it a lot. And so really an apprenticeship is part of the registered apprenticeship system in the US has two components. One is related instruction, so learning about the skills and competencies that you need. And that's typically done in the classroom of some form, either online or in person. And then on-the-job training, and that's done in partnership with the employer. And for the individual or for the participant, the thing that's great about apprenticeships are that there's a single standard set of skills and competencies that you're building from that are all employer validated. You're getting paid while you're doing this, and those wages increase as you gain more skills. You really do get this on-the-job training or work-based learning opportunities, but then mentorship from your company itself. And at the end, you get a nationally portable or a portable, nationally recognized credential from the Department of Labor, and oftentimes that's also paired with additional industry recognized certifications. For the employer, this is the ultimate try before you buy situation. They really get to kind of get to know an individual before they take them on as, a permanent employee. But obviously, there's a lot of success for employers here because 92% of people that take part in a registered apprenticeship program end up staying with the company or are retained after they complete their apprenticeship program. So this really has shown to have benefits for both employers and employees. So now the next question is why apprenticeships, and including why apprenticeships in IT. Most people think of apprenticeships as something that's for, the traditional trades. You've heard about them for construction or maybe manufacturing, but, IT has also been shown to be a great place for bringing in non-traditional talent, especially because a lot of employers are realizing that they just can't find the talent that they need from a four-year degree. We talked about this a lot in the opening session, but Minnesota is similar to, or Minnesota is definitely having this challenge similar to some of the major employers that are hiring for IT across the country, where we're asking for more degrees than there are degree holders. So one way that employers have tried to kind of address this is, and I will say too, here you can see that the national average for some of these, for some of the job postings for things like software engineer or network administrator or computer support specialist, it's down in the, less than 70% for all of these, if you look at national, but in Minnesota, we're still asking for 90%. So we're also making it harder for our employers to find talent because of some of these degree requirements. You've seen a number of places across the country that are trying to address this in new ways. So a lot of these initiatives are employer-led, which is very important too, and why, we've got employers here talking about it, why we're at MinTech working with our employer partners to try to figure out how can we take models that work. So one of the earliest adopters of apprenticeship and trying to get employers engaged in it was South Carolina with Apprenticeship Carolina. They've got a great system where, and they also have a youth apprenticeship system, getting people early in. The Chicago Apprenticeship Network is also something, or the Chicago Apprentice Network is something that was started by Aon and Accenture. It's now spreading across the country. This is, again, an employer-led initiative. Washington, D.C., San Francisco, even Minneapolis, St. Paul, the Greater MSP Partnership just joined the Apprentice Network to try to expand apprenticeships because, again, we have so many folks that are looking for talent in new spaces. We've got the CTA or Consumer Technology Association. They have an apprenticeship coalition, which was really driven by IBM and their system. CareerWise Colorado is another great example where they are primarily they're focused on youth apprenticeships, but trying to just spread apprenticeship throughout the state and have seen a lot of great results. And what I have on the right side of the screen here, these are all occupations that have already been approved by the Department of Labor. This is just a small section of it, but there are a number of programs or occupations that have already been approved by the Department of Labor to become apprenticeship programs in the IT space. So this is something that, we would not be groundbreaking here in Minnesota by trying to kind of expand IT occupations. And we'll be hearing from Apprenti in just a little bit, or from Jennifer with Apprenti in just a little bit about how they've helped expand. But even one of our neighbors, the Milwaukee Technology Association, is now using Apprenti to try to address their IT challenges or their tech talent challenges in Wisconsin. There's also a lot of funding and federal support for apprenticeship, both federal and state support that we can be thinking about, and which again makes it another attractive option because this means that employers aren't going to have to bear the cost of trying to start some of these new programs themselves. So the U.S. Department of Labor annually has grants that go out for apprenticeship programs to build new programs, to try to increase equity for the system themselves. One of them is, for an example, is WANTO grants, or the Women in Non-Traditional Apprenticeships and Non-Traditional Occupations. In Minnesota, at the Department of Labor and Industry, we also have the dual training pipeline and the apprenticeship system. And there, they offer grants that provide up to $6,000 per participant to help take away some of the costs for some of that related instruction or the supports that you need. And then the Department of Employment and Economic Development, or DEED, in partnership with the Governor's Workforce Board, also has to recognize registered apprenticeship programs for part of their eligible training provider list, or the list of all of the training providers in the state that can get funding to help offset costs of programs in the state. So there's a lot of ways to try to use state and federal resources to try to defray some of these costs. So with all of this in mind, MinTech, and we've talked in a number of these sessions now about what we're doing to try to work with employers to try to create and find new non-traditional pathways into IT. And so one of the things that we're doing is starting to have conversations with Apprenti as a potential partner to try to help us kind of build out and expand apprenticeships here in Minnesota. And we would be doing that, of course, in partnership with the Department of Labor and Industry, and have had conversations with them too. But I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer. And if anyone is interested in getting involved in these initial conversations, please feel free to reach out to me at katie@mintech.org. But I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer so you can all learn a little bit more about Apprenti and how they've worked with employers and helped kind of spread this across the US too. So I'll stop sharing my screen here and turn it over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Katie. And I want to appreciate you bringing us here today, but also, I've had the honor of working with you in DC. So we've had a long running history of how to advance apprenticeships. So this is just another great example of how we can expand that work. So again, questions, would love to have those today. You've already touched a lot on what an apprenticeship is. Just a couple of additives to that, because you mentioned internships, and that's something that I think we've heard all day, that there's a finite resource in the college ranks. And it's, the idea that we can expand our college enrollment system. It's not like we are utilizing the computer science system in the four-year education world today. So building capacity there to the level that we would need to consume it would take in the trillions to be able to do that at the state and federal level. And so when we think about internships giving us an opportunity to try before we buy, is what Katie said, this is an apprenticeship system is more about train to retain. So it's about investing in the people that we anticipate putting into a job role and a head count that we know we need to fill. And it's rewarding competency over pedigree. It's taking people who have high capacity and potential and reskilling them into the job classes that we need. And it gives us an opportunity to both create net new talent, which is ultimately where we need to start looking for the long term. But it also, at a localized level, at our own companies, we start building the talent the way we want to consume it. So this is, again, about domestically investing in the people who are in our own backyard and creating an opportunity system. And it's a parallel pathway. It's not intended to supplant the university system, but rather to augment it. And I think one of the common conversations I have with companies is to think beyond where we've started this conversation 5 or 6 years ago at the Department of Labor level, where companies were engaging in this as corporate social responsibility, and expanding it into the belief that this is a full talent development pipeline, and investing appropriately and making that work. With that, I will just kind of move on. You've highlighted some of the roles and occupations. These are the roles, I want to be really clear, these have been identified by the industry as an intermediary. Apprenti works with the companies on setting up their internal infrastructure. All intermediaries do that, and helping you be able to work through the system of apprenticeship. As Katie said, there are lots of different pieces to this, from funding and infrastructure to support systems for apprentices. There are several kind of organizations or an ecosystem that has to come together in order to implement apprenticeship. It's not exclusively on the shoulders of the employer to have to do this. All intermediaries support this in different ways. And these are the roles that the industry has come to the table and said, very pragmatically, we've started to assess from high tech, where at Apple and Microsoft and Google and Amazon, they're saying, okay, maybe not all of these jobs really have to have a 4-year college degree or higher, and we don't necessarily need multiple years of experience to make this work. And concurrently, they're now kind of looking at those differently and reclassifying roles. And now outside of the tech sector, big companies are also looking at this and saying, okay, what roles are truly apprenticeable? Meaning, if we take away the college degree requirement, we think that we can skill somebody up at an accelerated pace and provide them the on-the-job training of that minimum 1 year, where they're paired with a mentor, where they get the hands-on experience, so that at the end of that term, they can be retained in the role and be equitably qualified with somebody else who's entry level in that role. And so these roles are just the opening salvo, if you will, for roles that in our industry have historically required that degree and experience, but realistically can be managed through apprenticeship if we're willing to make an investment. And what goes behind each of these job titles, or this kind of standardized taxonomy, are the work processes that go with the role that the company will help that person get up to skill on. And then what you see below it are the most frequently requested training to get the person up to a technical bar where they can walk into the job and feel relatively competent that they're going to understand everything they're seeing as they start to grow into the role. These are all identified by companies. This is what we source as intermediaries to provide to the companies, both as services, but also in partnership with state and federal agencies from a funding perspective and local workforce boards in terms of support services. All of that gets brought together to support both the company and the apprentice coming through into these jobs. Oh, there we go. And that gives you a sense of the training window, my bad. Those are the classroom hours. And so when we talk about acceleration, that number of weeks you see is the front-loaded classroom time before they start job, in order to get them technically up to speed. So what do we do? Our role is really about things you've already heard very heavily this morning in the first section and when Ron was talking about this. And it's about how do we close the talent shortage when we know that the talent pool that's out there is finite. We in the United States only graduate 75,000 computer science degrees a year at the 4-year level, public and private combined. And as you saw, we've created over 200,000 net new jobs last year, and we know that nearly 1 million of them went unfilled. So that means we're going to have to do something different. The proverbial definition of insanity is doing the same thing, expecting a different outcome. It's time that we have to invest in a different outcome. And so if we're graduating 75 to 80,000 people at comp sci, and there are 85,000 visas, which we heard heavily this morning on the immigration side is something we would love to see bolstered. Our industry in tech in the United States collects and uses 60 to 65,000 of those a year. Realistically, we need a third leg on this stool. And apprenticeship is one that's used globally. It is enriched in Europe. It's heavily used in Asia. And we underutilize it as a system in the United States, not because it isn't a viable system. It just hasn't been one that had a necessity outside of the building, construction, and manufacturing trades. So they've done this wonderfully for 80 years. So now we're looking, societally in the US about employing apprenticeship in high tech, in healthcare, and financial services, and multiple non-traditional industries are now employing the system. And that should put us on a level playing field with our contemporaries in first world countries who have been using this for quite a bit longer than we have. So while we're a little bit behind the ball, I also think we have the means and all of the best practice learning globally to be able to accelerate this faster from a consumable level. It just requires a coalition of the willing, which is why hopefully we're all here today. So while our role is more defined on how to bridge this tech talent gap, I want to be really clear that there are a number of intermediaries who do what we do, and that you can work at internalizing the program of apprenticeship and building that internally for your company and really making that investment in hiring your own staff to execute this fully. And we can work with you on all of the steps that it takes to set that up. And to get it started and then seeded over to you, or we can manage the entire process for you. And we have a wide range of companies that do both models with us. And there are local agencies that can help work with that. You can work directly with training providers in your local yard there to help staff these folks and pull them out of boot camps. Ultimately, what a lot of companies have been seeing are they're making time investment in looking at a lot of localized opportunities and organizations that can fill pieces and parts of this. And apprenticeship kind of as an overlay nationally is a great funnel for pushing all of those opportunities into one system. It's much easier to standardize that way. It's much easier to consume from a corporate perspective if you're having to operationalize this. And it helps to level set the folks that are coming through it and get a more cohesive and consistent output on the training and education side, how you operate and manage it, and the credentialing that ultimately comes out of this that the industry has defined, but is bestowed by the US Department of Labor. And that credential is verifiable, it's background checkable, along with the classroom training that usually delivers some kind of certification. So this is about bridging all of the services and systems together into this ecosystem, from funders, workforce, talent vetting and training, the classroom training, and the employer who is putting up that job and ultimately making the investment in bringing that person up to a skill level that can be long-term consumable for us. Just to kind of give you a sense of what goes on from a diversity standpoint, because our focus is certainly around improving opportunities and pathways for diversity, women, underrepresented minorities, veterans, and then ultimately a subset of all of those will regularly identify that there's a disability or that they need an accommodation. We don't pre-qualify anybody on their educational attainment, nor do we ask them for their prior work experience, largely to reduce and eliminate as much of the bias from our system that's sort of inherently built into it. And so if we put all of that together, we are actually getting a hugely diverse population that are workforce transitional. Median age is 31. They're coming in with a lot of other life skill and experience that's applicable to us in our industry, just not through the traditional lens that we might evaluate our standard talent by. And we're bringing these folks in from a diverse standpoint that ultimately turns out when they get through their traditional application process, meaning they've been accepted by the company and they're filling out their normal new hire paperwork, that's when we get a look at some of that additional information. And 52% of them have a college degree at the 4-year level. But as was pointed out in some of the other sessions, if you attended those, they're not coming from, or I think even Jamie said this, they're not computer science degrees. They're coming from other disciplines and study systems that we're repurposing because they have a desire to work in tech. And these are people looking for an opportunity to transition without having to start over. Interestingly enough, within this subset, the folks that did not finish college or even go to college have exactly the same retention level as the people who went to college, which means that the college piece is no longer really the true indicator of success or ability. It just helps companies maybe work through some of its emotional toll around the college degree requirement. So with that, we've talked a little bit about how we work with the US Department of Labor. This is a flexible system, both whether it's through Apprenti or it's through any other organization, whether it's the Aons of the world who are showing you how to build it internally. We certainly partner with Accenture on how they build their programs so that they can help you take that roadmap, the employer roadmap for how to build out a program as well. This is really more of a preference at the company level about how you want to build it. And with that, I will turn it back over to you.
All right, do we have some time here for questions next?
Yeah, I think so. Yes, if anyone has any, I did see a question in the chat about, and let me just read it out loud. A large number of high school students who have no opportunities for internships or apprenticeships, and wondering how we can encourage companies to offer internships or pre-apprenticeships internships to pre-college students. And then I think the second part of this question is really important too, about, college and high school students can't afford to take unpaid internships. And I think that's something that we frequently see as a barrier to entry for occupations for more diverse talent, or for people that are from non-traditional backgrounds too, of how do you actually afford to take time away from work in order to try to get into a new career. And that's one of the things that we're really excited about apprenticeship, or that's one of the reasons that we're really excited about apprenticeship, because it really is a paid on the job learning experience. And, I think that one of the challenges that we face is just that employers aren't as aware of apprenticeship as an opportunity in the IT space. I think that there's, awareness and perception challenges that we face. Awareness, just even that IT apprenticeships exist and that this is something that is happening in other places across the country, because again, the perception is that these are just apprenticeship is for for the trades, or for, more hands-on skills. And so I think we're at an exciting time because we've had a number of cities and states across the country demonstrate that this works in the IT space. And so now, as Minnesota, we can kind of start learning from some of these best practices and get employers. We do have employers that are very excited and engaged. And if there are employers that are on this call too, and you're interested in being more involved, please reach out, because we are just at that kind of initial stages right now of understanding what the skills and competencies are from employers and what the occupations are that are most in demand. So then we can work quickly with the Department of Labor and with an intermediary like Apprenti to try to get these programs up and running. And once we do that, then we'll be able to, make better connections with these high school, college, post-college students, or people that maybe have some college but no degree, to try to bring people into this field. And I think we'll be trying to learn from best practices from other areas that have worked in Minnesota. So I think one thing that I've been thinking a lot about is how Deed, when they really were trying to get more CNAs, looked at folks who had completed some kind of training, but not actually finished, and, did a proactive outreach to them. So we're hoping to partner with Deed, with the Department of Labor and Industry, and then with the community-based organizations and with educators across the state to try to make sure that we've got a lot of opportunities here.
Yeah, if I can just tag on to the end of that, I think, part of what drives this, as I said, we're an employer-driven model. If this is a question about getting kind of that younger end of the spectrum, whether it's a pre-apprenticeship or that 16 to 21-year-old range, even though we place 18 and over, that's really an employer-driven conversation. It's about getting companies to think more broadly about who they're hiring and who they're willing to do the training with. I will say, honestly, we've come across a lot of companies that when we've talked to them, they love the idea of getting that median 31 because they've got 10 years of other life adult experience, and they're coming in with a level of maturity and understanding about how to show up on job. And the younger end of that, companies still struggle with how do we manage people where this might be their first experience coming into an office space, and they don't have that other life experience to call on. But that's part of a culture change that I think, if we're going to organizationally at a localized level and then nationally be talking about how to stand up and invest in a larger system, CareerWise Colorado has done that really successfully on the youth side. And they've demonstrated that it can work for large companies to do that, but it became a behavior change, and that behavior change came from the top. Those are organizational leaders at the C-suite making a determination that they're prepared to change the culture internally to accommodate for that, and then driving that change throughout their organization as they adopted it.
And Jennifer, can you talk a little bit about that just in more detail? Because we did get a question in from Jeff about, it's important to make sure that we're trying to provide non-traditional pathways, but what are employers doing, or what does Apprenti do to help employers kind of prepare for bringing in non-traditional talent? And can you talk a little more about that?
Yeah, I think, there are a couple of things that over the 5-6 years we've been doing this, sad to hear it's only 5 or 6 years, because it does feel like an eternity sometimes, but that it's that young in the country in terms of what we do. We've had to grow in what we provide. And so we give companies direct access to our chief diversity officer, who has a Waymaker platform where she comes in and coaches companies on that culture and behavior change as kind of a starting point. And then part of what we provide as intermediaries is training to the managers and the employer themselves on how to manage a little differently, how to interview differently from a soft skills perspective. It's not about lowering expectations, it's about changing the way we frame expectations. And how to communicate and coach individuals who maybe don't come through the traditional background, because you won't know until you've approved them that they may have that college degree versus they don't. But inclusivity is really the number one question we get from employers. And so we spend a lot of time working with employers directly on how to understand what inclusivity needs to look like when people are coming in with varied backgrounds. And that is all part of the onboarding process that we do. So it's as much on the apprentice side and getting them prepared to come to job and work in a different industry. And equally for some of them, never having worked in an office environment, understanding what is a hierarchy and how do we communicate, and, you know, asking for communication preferences and how to connect with people inside an organization. They get a different set of coaching than the employer gets, but it really is a large conversation that has to cascade down throughout the organization. And we try to touch point at multiple levels.
Thank you. That's really helpful. And that's definitely something that we at MinTech and through TIA are trying to think about, like, holistically, how do we make sure that we're setting everyone up for success, whether it's the talent that's coming through to try to find new pathways, or it's the employers that are looking for new talent, but, you know, are used to specific recruiting channels.
If I can add one thing to it, I mean, one thing that most of our large employers nationally, and we do this for every company size, large to small, but obviously the larger the organization, the bigger the change or transformation has to be there. It's clunky when we get started. There isn't a perfect answer because we're constantly learning as we go, and implementing change in an iterative process. And, you know, we didn't involve that DEI training at the beginning. We didn't involve that coaching for the apprentice at the beginning, and we've slowly modified work processes. So companies, just as much as understanding what it's going to take to onboard an apprenticeship program and bring apprentices in, need to make a commitment internally that this is for the long term. This is not a test. I mean, it can be a test in terms of those initial setups, so that we make sure we walk before we run, but it's a long-term strategic shift organizationally that companies have to be prepared to make, and be prepared to iterate as we learn with each new apprentice coming through that system, additional things that will need to be incorporated. And some of that has to do company by company with how they onboard and how they manage culture. And some of them are just technical, you know, let's add this and change curriculum and modify that, which are a little bit easier to do.
And that's one thing that I really like about the registered apprenticeship system too, is that not only are you able to learn from what employers have already learned in the system, but then you're also getting that additional support. Like from Minnesota, with the registered apprenticeship system, we'll be able to get the support of the Department of Labor and Industry, as well as the Department of Employment and Economic Development. So we won't have to be figuring this out on our own. They have a lot of experience in this space, but can kind of help lead us through in partnership with intermediaries and others on what are the best practices, how do we get the system going as quickly as possible. And then knowing that these are credentials that people will be getting that are kind of uniform, and skills and competencies that are uniform across the country. And I think that's important for probably a lot of our major employers here in Minnesota too, because there are multiple offices all over the state or all over the country. And so having credentials that can really be transferable and portable, and something that you can really be building your skills on as you go is also very, very important.
Agreed. Do we have other questions, Kevin?
I don't see more in the chat, but I have a couple for you. So one is, you know, it's really surprising. This is a program that's proven in the industry and other trades. You know, it's government supported with funding. You know, there's a lot of really great things about it. It's amazing that it's not more popular and hasn't grown to everywhere even more quickly. I know we spoke a couple of years ago about this, and it's grown dramatically since then, but it surprises me it's not everywhere. Can you talk a little bit about how to compare and contrast how this fits into the broader strategy where companies are bringing in people directly from college, bringing them in from boot camps? Is this an and or an addition to that strategy, or could they shift and do a different approach and leverage this in a larger way? And what are your thoughts on that topic?
Do you want to start, Katie, or you want me to?
Sure. Well, I'll start from the TIA perspective, or from the MinTech and TIA perspective for what we're looking at. And then it'd be great to hear your kind of more national perspective. But I think for MinTech, we're trying to look at all of the above, and thinking about apprenticeship as one of the many pathways that we can get in. You know, we are trying to, again, at this first level, understand what are the skills and competencies that employers are looking for, but then and what are the occupations that are most in demand? How many positions are they going to have that they want to be filling with, you know, non-traditional talent pipelines? And then is trying to build out partnerships from there. I do think that one of the challenges is that there is some hesitancy. We normally don't see people just diving headfirst and saying, okay, we are going to go all in on apprenticeship, and we've got 25 positions open and every single one of them is going to be an apprenticeship. We've seen that, with IBM, for example, they are using a lot of apprentices now to fill their talent needs. They started off with just a few, and now they have hundreds. So I think that's one of the challenges too, is that there is some hesitancy, even though this is a proven model. And I think that that's what we'll be probably doing with MinTech too, is starting with just smaller pilots based on where there is employer comfort, because again, oftentimes employers are a little bit hesitant to try something totally new like this when they do feel so comfortable relying on the 4-year degree as the signal of a high quality candidate. So I think part of the challenge is just getting to scale and having, a slower start, but trying to build out. And then, just making sure that people are familiar, because it seems like, we have the challenge of perception and awareness. So we're trying to kind of tackle those as well.
Yeah, I would say you're spot on. There are 3 reasons, even on a national footprint. One, conceptually, the U.S. Department of Labor, and rightfully so, would like to see us get to a societal level where we're prepared to post jobs as industry that say college degree or completion of apprenticeships. There's an equitability to it in how companies perceive the value. But that turn is not going to happen overnight. That's going to take 30 years. And so there's got to be long-term strategic sustained investment and give companies time to think about how to adopt it. The US as a system, as we've worked with like 100 large companies on this topic, our employment law is not set up to support it. Our employment systems are not set up around apprenticeship versus internship. So there's a lot of operational bending and twisting that has to take place inside of a company to adopt and get it going. And so that goes back to that coalition of the willing, and everybody is slowly getting there as they're examining how other companies have handled it. But that has led to a lot of the you go first, and then somebody else comes to the table wanting to do it. The other end of that spectrum is on the candidate side, the talent side. There's a lot of, an intense feeling around the word apprenticeship, and a belief that it means that it's blue collar job, because that's what it's historically been in the United States. So this idea from a talent perspective that apprenticeship can lead to white collar and no collar jobs that have high level sustainable incomes is equally as much of an education process as it is on the other side. There's a lot of perception changes that need to take place on both sides.
So there's a couple of things that jumped out. I mean, one is it's going to take some time, which is definitely, one challenge for us. Feels like we don't have a lot of time to address some of the challenges. And it also sounds like employer-led is one of the things that we can do to drive this more quickly.
Yes.
We can't wait for public policy to change and make this a mainstream approach.
Yeah, I think this is one where, Katie will speak on the policy side, that companies are going to have to drive this, and then the government will find ways to support and create systems and infrastructure for it. Our pain points are significant, but there has to be a shift in the desire to invest in creating talent instead of only consuming it. And that is a massive shift. I can't tell you the last time this country did that since post-World War II.
Yeah, and on the time, I mean, it's all kind of relative, because it takes 4 years to get someone with a 4-year degree. And so in trying to start an apprenticeship program and getting it scaled, it doesn't take 4 years. It takes maybe 1 to really get it fully off the ground. First cohorts in, we can get this done in probably this calendar year of getting apprenticeships off the ground in Minnesota. So I think that, and then the average length of time for an apprenticeship program in an IT field is about 1 year versus, again, 4 years for a 4-year degree. And we do have the challenge in Minnesota of just not having enough students in pathways that prepare them for IT fields in post-secondary education too. So we need to be thinking creatively, and we need to be thinking about, there are time, but if you're thinking about it as compared to how long it takes to get a 4-year degree, this is a much faster and more scalable model.
And Kevin, just to close on your question before, Think of this at an enterprise level, no matter what size your company is. If you take 5 interns a year, you should be thinking about taking 5 apprentices a year. If your company takes 1,000 interns a year, you should be thinking about matching that with 1,000 apprentices per year, not only because that's how it will scale, but honestly, they each represent 2 sides of the same coin, one with more hands-on experience, one with more theory. Those 2 complement each other really well.
All right, thank you both. Excellent discussion and dialogue. I really appreciate the information. I'm not sure who I pass it to next to wrap us up.
I can take over from here.
All right, thank you,
Yeah.
Piper.
Yeah, no problem. I want to say thanks to Katie and Jennifer and everybody who spoke today within the higher sector. As we kind of wrap up, we also want to give a big shout out to today's sponsors. Thank you, Optum, Thomson Reuters, Target, and Accenture for helping make this possible and having us all here to share these ideas and to connect. If you're looking for what to do next, one thing that we do recommend is considering joining the TechTalent community that we have here at MinTech. That's a great way to get involved and to continue having this conversation go forward. So I'm going to grab this and put this in the chat for everybody. But that's about all that we have today. So here is the link to, and forgive the photo there, that's my boss's picture. I'm using her account today. But there's a link where you can continue to do more with us. But yeah, thank you all so much for being here, and we hope you have a great rest of your day.